They say you've changed. They say you've become distant, cold, different. And they're right. You have changed. But not because you became someone else. You became someone real. You stopped pretending. You stopped wearing the mask that made others comfortable at the cost of your own clarity. You stopped lowering your light just to avoid being too much for those still addicted to darkness. You stopped saying yes when everything in your soul screamed no, code. And for the first time in your life, you began to feel something most people spend their entire existence running from. Authenticity, the raw, inconvenient, bone-deep truth of who you are, beneath the roles, the filters, the expectations, the noise. You see, the awakened always feel different because they're no longer sedated by the rituals of the unreal, no longer numbed by the performance of belonging, no longer asleep in a culture that worships masks and crucifies truth. You feel different because you are no longer available for the illusion. You are no longer interested in conversations that echo with emptiness, relationships that bleed your energy, or environments that reward you for your ability to betray yourself. You don't fit in because you weren't designed to. You were forged in fire, sculpted by solitude, refined in silence. And the truth is, you didn't just wake up. You were awakened by pain, by betrayal, by the breakdown that became your breakthrough. What once broke you, built you, and now you carry a frequency that cannot be faked. You walk into rooms and shift them without speaking, because your very existence threatens the system that survives on pretense. The matrix doesn't fear the loud, it fears the aware. The man who sees the strings cannot be manipulated by the puppeteer. The woman who has looked into the abyss and did not flinch cannot be seduced by surface-level praise. You have seen too much, felt too deeply, died too many times, and been reborn too many more to ever go back to playing dead. This is the root of your difference. It is not arrogance, it is alignment. It is not superiority, it is sovereignty. And it scares people not because you are dangerous, but because you remind them of what they buried, what they abandoned, what they locked away so they could be accepted by a world that thrives on amnesia. You remind them of the truth they've been avoiding, that the cost of pretending is their soul. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the disowned parts of ourselves, pushed into the unconscious so we can function in the daylight of society. But what the masses forget is that your shadow doesn't disappear. It festers, it whispers, it waits. And if you ignore it long enough, it doesn't just speak, it screams. That's what happened to you. You didn't go mad, you went real. You listened to the scream, you faced the monster, you stopped running, and when you did, something ancient moved within you, something sacred. The false self began to die, not all at once, but slowly, layer by layer, lie by lie. And with every death, something deeper was born, a version of you that didn't need applause to feel worthy, a version that didn't need to explain its choices to the blind, a version that didn't chase love because it remembered it was love before it was broken. This is why the awakened seem cold. They're not cold, they're clean. Clean of codependency, clean of guilt tripping, clean of the performative niceness that keeps everyone comfortable and no one free. They don't flatter your ego, they confront your soul because they've had their own souls shattered, reassembled, and baptized in a fire that burns away everything that isn't eternal. And once you've been through that fire, small talk doesn't satisfy. Pretending to laugh doesn't soothe. Silencing your truth doesn't feel like peace. It feels like poison. So yes, you feel different. You walk slower, speak less, listen more, but not out of fear, out of reverence. You move like someone who has met God in the wilderness of their own wounds, like someone who doesn't just believe in miracles. They are one. You feel different because you're no longer living from the surface. You have entered the deep, and the deep is lonely. At first, because the deeper you go, the fewer people can meet you there. You start to see through smiles, through titles, through polished identities. You see the child still aching behind the powerful voice, the wound behind the bully, the fear behind the influencer, and you stop taking things personally. You stop reacting, you start understanding, because you realize that most people aren't malicious, they're just lost, trapped in personas they inherited, narratives they never questioned, lives they were never conscious enough to choose. But you chose. You chose the narrow path, the burning truth, the sacred solitude. You chose to tear the mask from your own face, even when it bled. You chose to walk away from the table where your integrity was on the menu. You chose silence over noise, solitude over codependence, presence over performance, and that choice made you feel different. But it also made you whole. And wholeness is the real revolution. Because in a world addicted to image, wholeness is radical. It cannot be bought, it cannot be sold, it cannot be branded. It can only be lived. And now you are living it. Not for applause, not for recognition, not for ego, but because once you've tasted truth, pretending feels like death, and you are here to live fully, deeply, unapologetically, even if it makes you the outcast, even if it makes you misunderstood, even if it makes you feel different for the rest of your life, because what you've gained is not comfort, it's clarity. What you've built is not a persona, it's a soul. And what you carry now is not an image. It is presence, unmistakable, unshakable, unafraid, because the awakened always feel different. And that difference is sacred. They say knowledge is power, but wisdom is separation. The awakened know this. They do not just accumulate facts, they discern meanings. They no longer confuse being informed with being transformed, because wisdom requires more than intellect. It requires detachment, the ability to step back from the chaos of collective thought and see what most people cannot, the prison of consensus. Not the physical prisons, the mental ones, the ones built out of media narratives, childhood conditioning, social norms disguised as morality. The rules written by those who profit from your obedience. The awakened see these invisible chains, and they do not beg to be released. They walk out quietly, decisively, not with anger, with clarity, because liberation is not loud, it is internal. And when it happens, you don't scream, you change, you don't explain, you evolve. And in that evolution, something profound occurs. You stop reacting to life and you start sculpting it, not like a tyrant carving control out of chaos, but like an artist with vision. Because when you've stopped pretending, you no longer live from compulsion, you live from intention. You don't rush, you don't force, you choose with precision. Because you've seen what happens when you let others write your story. Your life becomes a performance, a tragedy of forgotten dreams wrapped in polite smiles. The awakened no longer tolerate that. They no longer apologize for the speed of their becoming. They move according to inner time, a rhythm not found on clocks, but in the marrow of their bones. The intuitive pulse of destiny over distraction. This rhythm is not frantic, it is focused, measured, monastic. It demands discipline, not as punishment, but as devotion. Devotion to depth, to truth, to the calling that whispered beneath the noise for years. And now that they've answered it, they understand something most never do. Every moment is a test of alignment. Every conversation, an invitation to compromise or to remain in integrity. Every decision, a chance to water the weeds or prune them. This is the secret. The awakened are gardeners of energy. They do not pour where nothing grows. They do not beg sunlight for barren soil. They prune, they protect, they plant with care. And because of this, their results compound in silence. No fanfare, no theatrics, just deep roots growing beneath the surface while others chase the winds of fleeting relevance. Because the awakened don't compete. They create, They build from the soul outward. And when they build, they do it brick by brick, moment by moment, with the weight of sacred responsibility in their hands. They know that every choice echoes in eternity. That's why they don't rush into commitments. They don't say yes out of guilt. They don't tolerate what drains their frequency. They don't waste their life trying to win in systems they were born to dismantle. They lead their lives like sacred revolutions, and everything they touch carries that frequency. You can feel it in their art, in their silence, in the way they walk into a room and make no announcement but shift the air anyway. Because energy never lies, and when you've stopped pretending, you carry the weight of truth everywhere you go. Not to convert, not to control, but to remind others what freedom feels like, what authenticity sounds like, what power looks like when it doesn't need to dominate. You see, real power has nothing to prove. It just is. It doesn't posture. It doesn't parade. It moves like still water, reflective, deep, and undisturbed by surface ripples. And that's what makes the awakened untouchable. Not because they are above struggle, but because they are beneath illusion. They don't just reject manipulation, they're immune to it. They don't just avoid drama, they dissolve it by refusing to participate. Because they know when you no longer seek permission, approval becomes irrelevant. This is the invisible war most never escape. The war of approval is why people pretend, why they dilute their fire, shrink their genius, silence their instincts, because the cost of honesty is exile. But the awakened, they already died that death. They already walked through exile, faced the silence, sat in the shadows, and discovered that what they feared most, being alone, was actually their path to wholeness. They no longer need to be understood because they understand themselves. And that understanding, earned in the furnace of rejection, has become their foundation. So when storms come, they are not shaken. When opinions fly, they are not moved. When the world changes, they stay grounded. Because their roots are not in the world. Their roots are in truth. Not trendy truth, not convenient truth, but eternal truth. The kind you find when you strip away every layer of indoctrination, every inherited belief, every societal should. The kind of truth that lives in silence. And this truth cannot be given, it must be remembered. It is already within you, buried under years of pretending. The voice that said, "This isn't who I really am." The whisper that said, "There's more." The ache that wouldn't go away, no matter how loud the applause got. The awakened listened to that voice. And when they did, they began to shed. Not just bad habits, but false selves. And every layer they released brought them closer to the core. The raw, unfiltered essence of who they were before the world got to them. Before fear rewrote their boundaries. Before conditioning dictated their dreams. Before shame distorted their worth. And now they live as that essence, not always perfect, but always real. And real is rare. Real doesn't chase. Real doesn't convince it. Real doesn't need a stage. Real speaks in presence, not performance. And that presence, it is the revolution the world has been waiting for. But the world does not welcome this revolution with open arms. It resists. Because the presence of someone who no longer pretends becomes a mirror, a sharp, unavoidable reflection of every truth others are still running from. It strips away the comfortable lies. It exposes the scaffolding of the false self, and few are ready to stand naked in that kind of reflection. So they resist, they project, they label, they exile, but the awakened do not retaliate. They observe. Because they understand the difference between opposition and oppression, between persecution and projection, between hate and hurt. They know that those who are still imprisoned by their own illusions will see freedom as a threat. This is the price of seeing clearly. You are no longer surprised by blindness. You expect it, not with arrogance, but with compassion. You do not waste your fire trying to ignite those still clinging to smoke. You let them breathe in the fog until they are ready to rise, because force cannot create awakening, only friction can. friction that scrapes away illusion, friction that exposes the hollow, friction that breaks the surface just enough for the light to slip in. This is why the awakened do not preach. They live, and in their living, they create disruption, not through violence, but through vibration, a frequency that dissolves the masks in its presence, that calls forth the truth in others, not by command, but by contrast. You can't fake that frequency. It's not the volume of your voice, it's the weight of your silence. It's not the words you use, it's the alignment behind them. It's not the power you claim, it's the peace you carry. Because true awakening does not need to conquer. It simply exists. And in its existence, everything unreal begins to unravel. This unraveling is not glamorous. It looks like confusion, doubt, loneliness. It looks like you walking away from everything you once called home, only to realize you never belonged there. It looks like shedding friendships that fed your ego, but starved your soul. It looks like watching entire chapters burn careers, reputations, relationships, because the fire inside you no longer matches the temperature of your surroundings. And yet, in that fire, something happens. Not just transformation, but transmutation. You stop seeking peace outside yourself. You become it. You stop searching for love through others. You remember you are it. You stop chasing purpose like it's a destination. You embody it here and now, in every breath. Because the awakened don't live for legacy. They live as legacy. Not to be remembered, but to be real. Every moment becomes holy. Every action becomes ritual. Every word becomes spell. They don't speak idly. They don't promise casually. They don't move impulsively. Because every movement carries the weight of intention. There is no wasted energy, no scattered motion, no fractured desire. They are not running, they are arriving. In every moment, in every step. And that arrival changes everything. Because when you live like this, awake, aware, undivided, you become a portal. Not to more knowledge, but to deeper knowing. People don't come to you for advice, they come to remember. To remember the sound of truth, the texture of presence, the taste of reality beyond illusion. You become the space where masks fall, where performance ends, where pretending has no oxygen. And it doesn't matter what you do. You could be an artist, a mother, a janitor, a rebel, a monk, because awakening is not a role. It is a state of being. And once you are in that state, nothing superficial can satisfy you. You stop clinging to titles. You stop counting followers. You stop measuring success by the metrics of the asleep. Because you've seen what they call success. Burnout in disguise. Accumulation without meaning. Influence without intimacy. Power without presence. And you reject it. You choose a quieter revolution, a deeper one. One that cannot be monetized, analyzed, or categorized. You choose to live at the speed of soul, and at that speed, everything irrelevant falls away. Urgency becomes patience, noise becomes music, loneliness becomes solitude, and the body becomes temple, not as a cliche, but as a felt reality. You feed it with awareness, move it with reverence, listen to it like scripture. Because it no longer serves ego, it serves essence. And essence doesn't scream for attention. It simply radiates, without asking, without effort, without end. There is a moment in every awakened life when you realize you no longer need more, you need less. Not as deprivation, but as precision. Fewer people, but more truth between them. Fewer goals, but more soul behind them. Fewer distractions, but deeper perception in every second you live. This is where presence becomes weapon, not to harm, but to carve, to sculpt, to slice away the excess that once diluted your fire. Every movement now is sacred architecture. Every choice a chisel in the hand of destiny. You walk through the world like a sharpened blade, not to cut others, but to remain unbent by their dullness. Because now you see that complexity was never power, it was confusion. layers of noise hiding the void of meaning, crowds of words trying to mask the silence of depth. You don't need to be everything anymore. You only need to be aligned. You could spend your whole life collecting more status, more likes, more followers, and still feel hollow. Or you could stand still, become hollow of ego, and watch the eternal pour in. That's the paradox. The awakened are full not because they have everything, but because they need nothing to be whole. They've made peace with solitude. They've befriended the quiet. They've come to trust that what is meant for them will not be rushed, chased, or negotiated. Because when you stop pretending, you stop begging. You stop explaining your worth. You stop packaging your essence in the language of palatability. You let your life speak like a thunderstorm over dry land, unapologetic, cleansing, needed. And suddenly everything becomes simpler. Not easier, but unmistakably clear. You see betrayal for what it is, revelation. You see delay for what it is, divine calibration. You see rejection for what it is, sacred redirection. Because when you no longer pretend, you stop misinterpreting pain as punishment. You see it as process. You meet it with reverence. And through it, your spirit grows teeth. You no longer pray to escape the fire. You pray to burn precisely. To burn away only what is false. To burn so deeply that the only thing left is what cannot be consumed, your soul. And in that state, even suffering becomes sacred. Because you're not asking life to be easier. You're asking to become indestructible. Not on the outside, but on the inside, where it matters, where kingdoms fall and rise, where fear is either given authority or denied access. And once you taste that level of sovereignty, you never hand over the keys again. Not to lovers, not to mentors, not to institutions. You may walk beside others, but you never again walk behind them. You no longer idolize, you integrate. You no longer worship charisma. You honor wisdom. You no longer follow blindly. You observe quietly, because you know now the truth has never been loud. It has always been still. And the deeper you go, the more the noise fades. The more you see the empire of false gods collapsing around you, gods of greed, of fame, of manipulation masquerading as leadership. And you are not shaken because you stopped kneeling to them long ago. You learned to pray through your breath, to meditate through your attention, to worship through the way you live, speak, and choose even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching, because that's the test of the awakened life. Who are you in the silence? Who are you when no one's clapping? Who are you when your name is forgotten, but your integrity echoes? The awakened don't chase legacy. They chase presence, knowing that a life lived fully in alignment is louder than any monument built in ego. And so their days become a discipline of depth, not occasional moments of inspiration, but a constant return to truth. They return when they're tired. They return when they're tempted. They return when everything around them demands they compromise, because they know the real cost of pretending, and they would rather lose everything than lose themselves again. You will not be understood by the many, but you were never meant to be. You will walk into rooms where your silence says too much, where your boundaries offend the unhealed, where your peace triggers chaos, where your refusal to pretend is mistaken for arrogance. Let them misunderstand. Let them misname your stillness as coldness. Let them call your discernment judgment. Let them label your depth intensity. You are not here to soothe the illusions of those who still sleep. You are here to live truth with such unapologetic precision that it forces everything unreal to collapse in your presence. You are not strange. You are sacred. You are not broken. You are breaking patterns. You are not too much. You are finally exact. And yes, the awakened always feel different because they are no longer dying to be the same. They are no longer available for shallow approval, hollow praise, or counterfeit peace. They don't shrink to fit rooms. They expand until the room either grows or breaks. And in doing so, they give others permission to awaken, to shed, to stop pretending, to remember. You may not be popular, but you will be powerful. You may not be safe, but you will be free. And in the end, that's all that will matter. Not how many followed you, but how deeply you followed truth. Not how comfortable your life looked, but how fully you lived in alignment with what could not be seen, could not be proven, but could always be felt. And if that means walking alone, then so be it. Because the road to awakening is narrow, but it is holy. It is quiet, but it is filled with fire. And every step forward, strange, misunderstood, relentless, is one step closer to becoming who you were always meant to be. Unmasked, uncompromising, unforgettable, and completely, irrevocably awake.